Severina and Pierre are a young married couple who seemingly should be happy. Pierre works as a doctor, and the couple live well. But even this does not make his wife feel satisfied, and all because Severine is a bourgeois masochist who is dissatisfied with her husband because he is a soft and sensual man. One day on his way home, Pierre becomes aggressive, as he has learned that his wife has not been faithful to him. Stopping on a road in the middle of a forest, he ordered two coachmen to drag the girl into the woods and tie her to a tree. She begged for help and screamed, but Pierre silenced Severina by covering her mouth with a blindfold. Watching from the sidelines, her husband ordered her to be whipped with whips and then allowed the coachman to take her by force. It might seem cruel, but in fact, everything that was happening was just another erotic fantasy of an unsatisfied wife. Not trusting her soft-hearted husband, Severina refuses him and doesn't let him get too close, so they are forced to sleep in separate beds. Vacationing at a ski resort, the couple spend time with friends, among whom are a childhood friend Renee and Henry, a difficult and narcissistic man, causing Severina fear and distrust. On her way to Paris, the married girl learns that one of her friends has become a brothel worker. Hiding it from her spouse, Severina is shocked that the girl makes love with anyone, but at the same time feels interested in it, constantly thinking about how to satisfy her sexual needs. Severina loses control of her emotions and movements, causing her to break a vase of roses and a bottle of perfume. In the evening, she asks Pierre to tell her if he went to brothels before meeting her, but is angry when she learns how good her husband was at the time. A few days later, Henry meets Severina again, and as if sensing her latent lust, hints at working in a brothel. He sees her dissatisfaction and tells her the address of a good brothel where girls can enjoy themselves and get pleasure and earn money at the same time. Severina pretends that she is not like that and that she is not interested in all this. But the next morning she goes in search of the brothel. Once on the right street, Severina is as indecisive as possible about the rightness of her action. Seeing one of the beauties working in the brothel, Severina realizes that she is not ready and runs away to the park. Her dissatisfaction grows stronger, so she changes her mind and returns to Henry's address. Afraid that she might be recognized and tell everything to her husband, Severina hides behind her sunglasses and acts with extreme caution. When she dares and finally rings the doorbell of Madame May's brothel, she meets a pleasant and attentive woman who is ready to offer her a high-paying job. After a bit of socializing, Severina agrees to become easily available, not for the money, but in order to get the pleasure she lacks with her husband. Fearing exposure, she warns in advance that she will only be able to work until 5 o'clock in the evening, as her husband returns from work at that time and should not suspect anything. After agreeing to start with a 3-hour shift, Severina goes to the hospital to check on her husband and ask him not to rush home after work. On her return to the brothel, Severina, together with Madame Nays, chooses a creative pseudonym for herself and settles on Daytime Beauty. Due to her work schedule, her partners Charlotte and Mathilde are already entertaining a client, who is Monsieur Adolphe, a rich and cheerful owner of a candy factory. He is ready to spend all his free time in the brothel and shows attention to the girls, pleasing them with expensive gifts and funny surprises. Noticing that there is a new girl in the house of Madame Nays, Adolphe decides to try out Day's beauty and asks to leave them alone. The married Severina is squeamish of the rich man and escapes from the bedroom, but Nays forces her back in. The brothel owner, as well as Adolphe, realize that the girl likes to be strict and rough with her, so they treat her accordingly, resulting in the factory owner becoming her first satisfied client. Having finished her work, Severina hurriedly returns home and burns the underwear she was wearing in the brothel. She realizes that she made a mistake and hides it from her husband, pretending to suffer from a terrible migraine. The girl's consciousness does not allow her to forget what she has done, so she is haunted by unpleasant dreams. In one of them, Pierre ties her up on a farm and lets Henry throw mud to point out where she belongs and who she would be if not for her wealthy husband. Despite her tormented conscience, Severine returns to Madame Nate's brothel a week later and asks for another chance. Having received as the next client a polite and well-mannered professor, the girl hurries to his bedroom and removes everything unnecessary. These actions outrage the professor because he has conceived a game and demands that Daytime Beauty adhere to the rules. She is unable to satisfy the client, so she is replaced by Charlotte. Madame Nace wants Daytime Beauty to learn how to satisfy clients, so she offers to spy on what is happening in the next room. As it turns out, despite his modesty, the professor is a real maniac who likes to obey. He likes it when bossy girls humiliate him and make him apologize, after which they stomp on his face and use a whip. Having received a good lesson, Daytime Beauty takes another client, which is a full man of Asian appearance. He pays generously for the girl and behaves aggressively, after which he silently leaves the brothel. The maid sees that the room is full of traces of blood and overturned furniture, so she sympathizes with Severina. But the girl does not need it because for the first time she felt happy. She liked the rough treatment and realized that she didn't come here for nothing. Sometime later, Daytime Beauty begins to work not only in the brothel, but also outside it. Having met a man in a restaurant on the street, the girl arranges a meeting at his country estate. The next morning, as soon as her husband leaves for work, she goes to the Duke and becomes a black bride. In a semi-transparent outfit, the girl is not intimidated by the fact that she has to lie in a coffin, because it is part of a role-playing game for which she will be paid generously. The Duke is sweet and gentle with her, but treats her like a corpse he has said goodbye to. He knows that worms have settled in the heart of the deceased, but the Duke's perverted fantasy excites him. And because of that, the man climbs under the coffin and engages in hand-fucking without even touching the Daytime Beauty. After the incident, the girl is thrown outside into the rain without explaining what she did wrong. Soon after, Severina's attitude towards her husband begins to change. She shows more sympathy and respect for Pierre and goes to bed with him for the first time in a long time. The spouse dreams of children, but according to the girl, it is too early to think about it because they are still not so close. A couple of days later, Henry comes to the girl's house, but Severina does not let him on the threshold and asks the maid to escort the uninvited guest. Thoughts of how she and Henry make love right under the table in the restaurant, where her husband and best friend are dining, do not give her peace. A few days later, Hippolyte and his faithful friend Marcel arrive in Paris, two bandits who make money by attacking letter carriers. With the stray money, the criminals go to a brothel to have some fun. Hippolyte pays attention to the new girl, but Marcel asks to leave the Daytime Beauty to him. The older fellow concedes, as he owes the guy his life and does not want to conflict over an easily accessible girl. Marcel turns out to be demonically attractive and cruel in bed, but this is what wins the heart of Daytime Beauty, who gave him more than just her heart. A few weeks later, the couple goes on vacation to the seaside, but their weekend ends in scandal. Meanwhile, Marcel and Hippolyte continue their criminal activities and contact the Russian mafia to buy white powder. Marcel thinks only of the easily accessible girl, so he calls her as soon as the opportunity arises. Meeting again, he would like to hit the Daytime Beauty, but she is not allowed to have marks on her face, which can be seen by her husband. The couple gets swept up in not only their relationship, but also Severina's relationship with her husband. Sometime later, an old client, who turns out to be Henry, appears in the brothel. Seeing her husband's friend, the girl is greatly embarrassed, but he chooses her. Realizing that she is on the verge of exposure, Daytime Beauty promises to satisfy any desires of the man, but he does not need it. He has shown interest in her as a married beauty, but is not interested in her as an easily accessible girl with an hourly wage. At the same time, Henry is not surprised that Severina has become a brothel worker and promises not to tell her husband anything. Despite her promise to keep her secret, Severina quits her job and returns home. She is haunted by nightmarish visions of Pierre and Henry dueling over a bound beauty. Luckily, her husband wins and unties her, but Severina doesn't want this to become a reality. As soon as she leaves the brothel, Hippolyte and Marcel follow the girl, learning her real name and residential address. Marcel decides to meet her and promises to tell her husband everything. Tired of hiding and lying, she is ready for it, but at the last moment she changes her mind and asks her lover to leave before her husband comes home. Losing control of himself, the criminal quarrels with his accomplice and kicks him out of the car. As soon as Pierre appears on the threshold of the house, several shots ring out. Running out onto the balcony, Severina realizes that the criminal has tried to take her husband's life, but now has to flee. Literally on a neighboring street, Marcel gets into a car accident and takes the life of the driver. The culprit is pursued by the police and eventually takes the bandit's life. Fortunately for Severina, her husband survived but was in a coma for a long time. A few months later, he never recovered from the incident, becoming a nearly blind and mute invalid confined to a chair. Despite her husband's plight, Severina takes care of him, bringing him food. She learned to appreciate what she has, but too late. Soon on the threshold of the girl's house is Henry, who decides to tell his friend the truth. Learning that his wife worked in a brothel, Pierre cries and, having suffered a heart attack, leaves this world. Severina is not ready to believe this, so she plunges into her fantasies, where she sees a quite healthy husband, with whom she makes plans for the weekend. Hearing bells, the girl looks out the window and sees a carriage as empty as her life. And that's where the movie ends.